Hey everyone, in this video I wanted to go over some key concepts from the reading this week in Chapter 8, Evaluating Internet Resources in a Post-Truth Age. We're really just looking at the first part of this chapter this week, and then we'll look at the rest for next week. So, so the chapter breaks down the strategies in three categories: evaluating written arguments you find on the internet, and this is what we're focusing on today and this week. And then the other strategies, understanding strategies and issue-oriented images on the internet. So that we'll look at next week, along with identifying biases you might bring to your internet research. Because sometimes those biases might interfere with your ability to determine whether or not a source is true or valid. And before I continue, I wanted to clarify what some of these terms mean. So what's the difference between truth, facts, and validity? Okay. So when we talk about truth, we're talking about the truth. What is true is what is real, what actually happened. So we're talking about sort of objective reality. Okay. Now, of course, the problem with objective reality is that nobody experiences reality objectively. So it's an open question whether or not objective reality is does objective reality even exist if the only reality that anybody ever knows or talks about is always to some degree perceived subjectively, right? But of course, what we kind of determine to be objective reality is, what we would call facts, right? So this is sort of the accepted record of the truth, right? And, and that record is based on, our subjective experiences, but also upon what we've agreed to be valid evidence for, what we're going to call objective truth, right? So there is a difference, though, between the truth and what we consider to be the facts, all right? And this is how facts can be wrong, okay? Because the facts is just the record, what we've determined to be true. We can't actually go back in time to, to determine what exactly happened on board or what exactly happened to, say, the Titanic. All right. But there is a record of what happened. Okay. And to the extent that that record is accepted as valid evidence of the truth of what happened, then those are facts. All right. And some of this may sound kind of obvious, but it's important to distinguish because, when we get into, for example, conversations about, when people use the phrase alternative facts, right? And, there's the whole conversation, is there such a thing as alternative facts, right? Yeah, I mean, to some degree, there can be alternative facts. Unfortunately, there can be a different record of the truth. So then what we get into is the evidence. This is where we get into validity. All right. So are the conclusions that we're making logically supported by the evidence, or are they biased or misleading us? Okay. So if and this can apply to, a statement of fact. All right. So are the facts that are presented to us actually logically supported by the evidence that exists, or are they biased or misleading? Okay. But it could also be, it could also apply to our interpretation of the facts, to theories that we are proposing based on the facts, or proposals that we're making based on the facts. Okay. So, so when we get into validity, we're talking about a broader range of conclusions that we might make based on the evidence that's provided. All right. And so again, we kind of have these three layers of, truth, what actually happened, the facts, which is the agreed upon record of that truth, and then this idea of validity, right, which might be used to apply to the facts, but also our conclusions based on the evidence that is presented. All right, so getting back to what is in the book. Okay, so the book goes through a number of signs that a website's true claims are untrue, or we might say invalid. So it could be, for example, that the statistics that are presented are undocumented, right? And so that means that there's no, no source information provided for the statistics. All right, so numbers are just being thrown around without any attempt, without giving us any way to double check. All right. So if you see undocumented statistics, a few things to consider. You can try to detect what is the agenda of the site, right? Especially when figures are extreme. So if a site says that 95% of something is going to support whatever it is the site is proposing, those are pretty extreme figures to present without any documented sources to back it up. All right. So be wary of statistics that are given to support a site's agenda when those numbers are not actually given sources. All right. They're not part of any kind of outside study. If statistics are sort of vague, like a vague statistic would be just if somebody says the majority or the vast majority of cases, that this might be a sign that more studies needs to be done. Source of information is misrepresented. All right. So in this case, a website is presenting information in a way that misrepresents what the source is actually saying or the conclusions that the source is actually making. All right. It's slightly different because the next one is quoting out of context. So the difference between source of information being represented and quoting out of context, which is also misrepresenting a source. In this first one, we're not necessarily talking about a quotation. We're saying that we're talking about somebody's conclusions. All right. So recommendation: visit sources, look for differences in terminology. All right, especially when a website is overstating a source's conclusion. So a source might say that one thing causes something else when the source is actually saying that there's a possible association. So one trick is to take a source's conclusions and make them sound a lot more definitive than they actually are, right? So a possible association, does not necessarily mean that one thing causes another. It could be there's a correlation between two things. So the difference between a cause and a correlation is that two things, might have, for example, might both share a certain cause or a certain set of causes, but might not actually be related. Okay. Let's see, quoting out of context. Here we are actually using, taking a direct quotation from a text, but we're presenting in a way that is misleading. All right. And that it misrepresents what the words, that both either the intent of the words or the intent of the article. So you want to visit the source, find the quotation, see if the quoted words truly represent the speaker's views. Okay. Or if they truly represent the intent of the source's author. All right. And this is an important one too, because, at the end of the day, the source that you're providing is the name on that works cited page, the name in that citation. So if the intent of the author is to challenge a position, and you're quoting the position itself that the source is actually challenging or disagreeing with, right? That's a misrepresentation, and you might still be able to use that quotation, but you should give it some context that this comes from an article that is actually attempting to challenge or debunk this idea. You should also consider the situation to which the quotation applies. It could be this quotation is discussing a completely situation and it does not apply to whatever the website is discussing, right? So a quotation might be used to apply to it might be applied to, for example, children, to make it, try to make some kind of claim about children. But it could be that the quotation, is really describing adults, or maybe a specific, it could be something that's, they're discussing children with special needs. And so this is not a claim that's meant to apply to all children everywhere. All right. And that's usually what happens, is that somebody will take a quotation that's meant to apply to a specific group, okay, or a very specific situation, and then try to take it and make it sound like it should apply to everyone or all situations. All right. And then 3 more, burying facts. Okay. So when a quotation, presents facts, statistics that seem to undermine the position, but does so and sort of presenting facts in passing or vaguely. All right. So you want to pay attention to any time that a fact is mentioned only in passing. What that means is, just maybe a sentence sort of alludes to it, but ultimately the article is sort of dismissing something that actually, it counters or is problematic to the overall argument. So if a fact or a source on a website weakens or troubles the site's claims, but it doesn't really go into a lot of detail as to why or how, then that's something you should pay attention to. Framing through loaded, biased language. All right. So using words that are intentionally meant to appeal to our emotions or to get us to feel a certain way about something, words that have, strong positive or negative connotations. Okay. So, so if a website's calling a proposal sort of evil or malicious, these are words that have very strong negative connotations. It's very likely that whoever's making the proposal is not intending to be evil or malicious. And so, so you want to be on the careful, words that really emphasize the morality of the issue, and do so in very extreme terms, or tend to be what we call loaded, biased language. Okay. And it's not to say that, that you can't discuss the morality of a position without being loaded or biased. But, particularly if it's sort of a controversial or a heavily debated topic, and somebody's trying to frame it in these very extreme, very, very sort of polarizing moral terms, right, that sort of imply that there's no gray area, or no potential for compromise, that's a sign of bias right there. So you want to consider how or why the site might be attempting to change, influence your perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs based on how it's describing the topic, how it's presenting the topic. the specific words that are being used. And then the last one, which is relevant, and with the internet especially, is the site being deliberately ridiculous? Okay, and it gives some examples of sites that are basically satirical. So a satirical site, might present a certain claim in a way that sounds like it's being serious, but actually it's being ironic, and it's poking fun at some idea. So The Onion, for example, is a satirical news source that pokes fun at actual news sources, while also poking fun at the people who are often the subjects of those news sources, like celebrities, politicians, etc. So an Onion article is, the title presents itself as something completely serious, but actually it's not intended to be taken seriously. It's a joke. So it is possible, if the satire is subtle enough, that that people might actually believe that it's real or legitimate. So you should always consider, especially if something is taking what seems to be sort of an unusual or extreme position, you should always consider, is this actually being satirical, intentionally comical? And if you're not sure, then you might do a little research on the site, either by Googling the name of the site to see if it's recognized as a satirical or comic site, looking at other articles on the site to see if any of the other articles are more obviously satirical or comical. Okay. All right. So that's it for this video. Thank you and have a great day.